Hi, you're with Sam Higgins and Peter Carr on LonghausTV's The Research Channel. We often get asked by clients to look at a number of issues, and while typically on Research Channel we talk about some of the briefings we've taken and recommendations for clients as a result of that, one of the things we're doing in 2011 is increasing the transparency of the business, as we've done since we founded the company in 2005-06. And in that regard, what we've done is actually on the website now on longhaus.com, you'll now see a new module down the bottom under the research area that actually has a list of topics that we've been working on. One of the topics that comes up a lot for our clients is the challenge of trying to identify who to partner with. Almost every second inquiry that we do, Peter, would have, please give us a list of vendors for X. Yep. That'd be the case, wouldn't it?
Yep, very true.
And so one of the things that we started to play around with in the boardroom a couple of weeks ago was a thinking tool or a framework to try and address this problem. So you can imagine post-GFC, the Australian economy came back. We've seen a return to growth. Our own tech index has shown continued both confidence of CIOs as well as actual activity in terms of looking at the different factors in the indices. We're still seeing that going up. But the constraints that exist in the economy around things such as labour and organisational structures and just trying to get ourselves ready and arranged in the right way to kind of exploit this growth requires a fair bit of thinking. And so the service delivery challenges that organisations have in terms of that selecting a vendor does really require some thought. So Pete, you took a look at this challenge. There's a bunch of factors that I haven't touched on that kind of drive organisations. Maybe let's start with that. What are some of those challenges that people are facing in this kind of growth period that we're in?
Okay, so going back to the question we get asked is often, help us identify the right partners to help us deliver this stuff. But stripping back a few layers, the drivers for that stuff is that the technology budgets that we're seeing are stable or growing. Yep. Infrastructure spending continues to grow as a percentage of overall budgets. Mm-hmm. And what we're also finding is, as you pointed out, already a scarcity of resources. So what that means is increased budgets generally means more projects, mm-hmm. More projects within already bloated portfolios. Yep. And then finding the right people to do them. So it's a mix of, well, you're going to get your own people to do them or you're going to get some partners to do them. And so those drivers, more ICT spending, less people, and the other big challenge is really the continuing maturity level of the program or portfolio management office within ICT organisations. Those three things combined are making it very difficult for organisations to choose the right approach.
And there's a real continuum there. Like you say, at one end we've got do it yourself, and at the other end we've got go and find a partner that can do everything. Mm. There's a whole stack of choices that exist along that continuum that need to be considered, right? And we often have organisations come to us talking about contractor management strategies or selective sourcing. All of these kinds of things get bandied around somewhere between do it yourself, and give it all to a single partner. Yeah,
that's right. And selective sourcing, sourcing's often considered by organisations as, oh, we'll just get someone to do it for us. Mm-hmm. Whereas, sourcing itself can include contingent labour, so go and hire a contractor. Or sourcing can include, go and hire a project management firm or mm-hmm. the services delivery arm of the technology partner who's providing the underlying right. platform for you. Yep. And then you start to get into the system integrators, then you get into the Australian sourcing companies, then you get into the global service delivery providers, and then you get into the offshoring market. So it's really a case of all those things are services and sourcing options. So given these challenges, what we've done is come up with a thinking tool, a strategic framework, if you like, that we've called the Longhaus Controlled Delivery Framework, which looks at the different decisions that organisations must consider at quite a detailed level before they can go and decide, hey, you know what, I've got these three projects and I think these are the best sort of partners to help us implement those things. So let's just go through that framework now. So Sammy, you want to take us through the x-axis, the bottom axis, which is really talking about the organisational approach to the delivery of these projects.
Yeah, look, one of the things that's really important when you consider sourcing is before you even decide what it is you're going to buy, you really have to make some decisions about whether or not you're even interested in owning that infrastructure. We do see a lot of organisations kind of default to that model, which you can see is kind of on the left axis there, which is about ownership and complete control, colloquially what we call your mess. But there are other options. We can move from an ownership model where I have to spend all the capital, where I have to actually buy, integrate and install all of the infrastructure that I choose to use. Or I can move to a model where I'm actually leasing or having some of that managed. So this is this kind of typically what we hear bandied around when people talk about managed services or managed maintenance, where I'm not actually paying a capital cost up front. What I'm doing instead is amortising that capital cost over an agreed period of time. So effectively spreading that across an agreed period. And it's typically the life of the asset. So really all I'm doing there is changing the financial model, giving some access to delivery to a service provider, but typically I'm still taking a pretty big architectural stake in how that managed or leased infrastructure has been put together. The final kind of end of the continuum there in the framework is, I suppose, the rental model, and by that we mean the complete. I don't sign up for any agreed period of time. I'm not worried about the capital at all. I just agree a price that exists, and I'm going to keep renting that for as long as I feel is necessary.
Which in this case, remembering the context of the question, is really a case of how can you help me get through this overburdened project portfolio?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. In a time of growth where my ability to buy and own things myself is probably constrained, as you said before, by labour, by access to capital, by a whole stack of things.
And so this leads into then the y-axis. If we look at the y-axis, what we're really talking about there is the organisational context of the projects that you're looking to deliver. And so this would be a typical way of assessing the project portfolio by looking at those projects which are specifically designed to keep the lights on in the business, defined as run the business sort of projects. These are the business as usual activities, a lot of maintenance and technical support staff, refreshes and upgrades, those sorts of things. Sitting over the top of that, of a slightly higher order and slightly organisational value, are then the grow the business projects. So whether or not that might be the establishment of a new regional office or a new business line, these are typically non-business as usual activities. They go beyond the scope of what the normal employees in the ICT organisation would typically have the skills to manage. And then sitting over the top of that are really those transformational sort of activities where we're looking at them and saying, we don't offer this as a business, it's not lights on, it's not really growth, because growth is usual business, just done
more efficiently, more effectively,
or somewhere else. Whereas transformational is really looking at bringing in new skills, new services into the business that haven't been there before. So then, when you look at those two axes together, what we effectively have is 9 segments within this framework, and depending on where in that framework your organisational decisions lie, really does determine the sorts of partner that we can identify in the market to help you deliver those projects.
The other thing, once we've got those segments and we understand what those potential categories are that we could approach the market from, there's some other things we need to think about, aren't there, Peter? There's some principles here. We often hear people talk about architectural principles and sourcing principles. So to complete the thinking model, take us through this third piece.
Yeah, so the principles are really important. You're right. If it was as easy as x-axis, y-axis equals 5 vendors, then we probably wouldn't be in business, right?
A whole stack of contract management people would be out on their ear.
Exactly, and the fact is that a lot of the PMOs in existence across large enterprise would probably be running a lot more effectively and efficiently. But a lot of these organisational principles is where companies come unstuck, because they do require being tied back to the strategic vision of the business, and so they often require business rules that aren't articulated by the people seeking the projects. So just
and they also differentiate, right? That some of these decisions about what principles apply then will differentiate how we would select a vendor for 2 organisations in the same segment.
Exactly. So let's just give you an example of a couple. So sourcing principles. An organisation may decide to source by business line. So for an organisation like Qantas, that may be their freight business line. Let's look at sourcing by that. An organisation may look to source by service line. But the sourcing principles really are defining, am I looking for a single source approach, a strategic sourcing approach, a value-based sourcing approach, a price-based sourcing approach, what else, or value chain, all these sorts of things. So there's a principle around sourcing. What is it you're looking to achieve?
And we've provided some definitions for those principles as well for our clients to use.
We have. So another principle would be the organisational ICT delivery principles. So this is really looking at, do we want to offer ICT as a shared services model? Is it centralised?
Yep.
Is it federated? Are we looking at a term of investment in terms of a discrete period of time to look at something outside the context of those other? And then finally we have the architectural principles, which is probably your bailiwick, but what we're really talking about there is these underlying principles of maximising benefit to the organisation for that particular investment, business continuity, a common use of applications that may exist elsewhere in the organisation. These all then play into the sorts of procurement partners or delivery partners that we would look for. Okay, so let's just wrap up then and quickly take everyone through recommendations by running through this one more time. Mm-hmm. The control delivery framework is designed for customers to think about who and how they acquire their service delivery partners before they actually go down the path of choosing them. Now this applies as much as if you're just looking to hire contractors, as opposed to if you're looking to move 50% of your business offshore. These are really critical considerations, right?
Because it's important to narrow, as we often say to customers, it's important to understand some basic criteria before you can even narrow down the ICT market. And increasingly, as we see these vendors of all sorts cross different segments with as-a-service offerings and cloud computing, or adding a services division to an existing hardware and software business, the ability to unpack this really large vendor community becomes tougher and tougher if you don't have a framework like this.
Yeah, exactly. So step one, consider your organisational approach to service delivery. And by that we're talking about, do you want to own it? Do you fundamentally want to lease it? Or do you fundamentally want to rent it?
Yep.
Okay. The second step is then to consider the organisational context of the project itself. Mm-hmm. Is it something that is business as usual, lights on? Is it running the business? Is it a growth project? Or is it a transformational project for the organisation?
Got it.
The third factor, Sam?
Principles.
Organisational principles.
So you need to understand your approach to sourcing, the way in which you want to structure your organisational ICT delivery, and any architectural constraints that might be coming down from the business requirements and business strategies that will also influence the way in which you procure.
So what then that gives us is a particular point of interest or segment in the framework. So for this example, let's talk about an organisation who has decided that for growth projects, mm-hmm. Their approach is really, their preferred approach from an organisational perspective is really just to rent that capability. Yep. Because they don't want to add headcount, additional budget and all these sorts of things. So if they're renting and it's growth projects, then we're really talking about the more or the door segment in terms of the framework. So
that's right.
What are we talking about there?
So in that example, more or the door is a procuring organisation that is seeking a partner who can deliver both enhanced services for the organisation and greater service and solution capability than would be otherwise available internally. Organisations in this part of the framework are seeking or providing a speed of platform development, so they want to get things out very quickly. They have a recognition that they need to be able to scale very fast and are looking for large economies of scale in those growth projects. So they're looking for a way to control the incremental cost and keep that incremental cost quite small.
Okay, and so to tie this back to the original question then, what would be a couple of examples of the type of vendors mm-hmm. In that particular space? Are we talking about full services companies? We're talking about trusted cloud providers? We're certainly not talking about contracted labour.
Exactly.
We're certainly not talking about project management companies or even the services arm of your local value-added reseller.
Mm. And they have to be significant companies. If we're talking about economies of scale, then we're really starting to talk about some of the larger organisations. So you would have to start to look at those big services organisations who can deliver those economies of scale.
Right. So I guess the final word is this is a great framework for helping you make some of those strategic decisions, but also to help different divisions in an organisation come together. The PMO is often a separate division to the delivery parts of the organisation, whether they be the application delivery arm or the infrastructure delivery arm or even the strategy guys, right? So this is a great discussion tool to bring them together. So, but if customers would like some specific context of this in their own businesses, then certainly reach out.
Terrific.